Då så. Welcome everyone to the Researcher Desk lunch seminar. And today I have the pleasure to present Cecilia and Lars that will contribute to this presentation here today. And they are member of the People's Parliament, as you probably every one of you know about. And so they will actually update us on the People's Parliament's climate transition plan for Sweden and the focus in on EU legislation and the rise in emissions after 2022. So please, Cecilia, continue.
So thank you very much for inviting us, Paul. And it was a late announcement, really, because I was in contact with Alastair last week when I saw there was a cancellation for today. So I offered to present what we are going to present today. Who are we? My name is Cecilia Emanuelsson. I'm a professor in biochemistry at Lund University. And I retired. I'm still active at the Institute, but when I retired 3 years ago, I thought I had to do something about the climate issue. And then I found Klimatriksdagen, or People's Climate Parliament. And I was impressed by the knowledge in that quite small organization. And it's very easy to recruit people to this organization. It's not like becoming a member of a party. So I joined, and Lars Schütt, who is here today, is one of the writers of this report, and he has also done a lot of calculations. He is an economist. I am not. And our ambitions today is to give you a sort of impression of what's the content of this document and why I think it's so important. So Lars is here to answer your questions in the end, and I will do my best now to summarize the main features of this report. It's available online, but we have not started yet to distribute it, so therefore viewpoints from all of you are welcome. It's a small organization, Klimatriksdagen, and it tries to raise the climate issue in the political discussions. And we have contacts with all the 8 parliament parties and try to communicate with each of them. So there is a lot of knowledge in the organization. It's many retired people who contribute when they retire. And to the left, in the corner, down left here, I just sort of illustrated that a lot of remisskrivande comes from this organization. Okay, what we will talk about today is that the climate transition plan that was made already 2022 has been updated, because now we have the EU legislation and also the fact that the emissions are increasing. So it's much harder to reach the climate goals that we want to reach. So I start with 3 key aspects of this climate transition plan. The starting point is an emissions budget. And so many things that we read about the climate doesn't take that as a starting point. But everyone here knows that the world has 400 to 500 gigatons left to release. And according to the Paris Agreement, we will try to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees or at least below 2. So this must be a natural starting point that we have signed the Paris Agreement. And we have also signed that it should be a fair distribution. So it's not a per capita for all the inhabitants in the world. Countries who already emitted much carbon dioxide should emit less. So this is calculated now, the 222 megaton is calculated based on the Tyndall method with Kevin Andersson. And another thing is that we see it as natural that we must meet the obligations we have towards EU, both in the so-called ESR sector and in the LULUCF sector, and I will go through them later. And we have concrete suggestions for actions to take with political decisions in 3 key areas. It's energy and industry, it's transportation, and it's forestry. I should also note that when the calculations were made in 2022, it was still possible to reach the 1.3 degree goal to limit the warming. But because since 2022, the emissions have increased, you know, maybe that they increased by 18% in 2024. It's no longer possible, so this plan now assumes a 66% chance to limit warming to 1.5 degrees and only 17% chance to limit it to 1.5 degrees, just so that you know. Then another important key aspect is that a system-wide approach is needed. One cannot do just a little bit here or a little bit there. So the state and the government must ensure that the climate goals permeate all policy areas. And then one has to use the whole set of instruments: financial policy, investments, economic means of control, legislations, and the state-owned enterprises to reach the goals. And it's also written in this now updated report that it's also important to incorporate climate adaptation, because the climate crisis is already here, and security policy measures to cope with the already extreme weather that we see today. And then the third key aspect is a fair transition. A fair transition must reduce injustices and compensate vulnerable groups and point to a better and a sustainable future. So I jump to the summary already. I jump to the summary to say that quick decisions to take for any government, and especially after 2026, is 4 things here. To reduce the fossil fuel dependence by phasing out subsidies for fossil fuels. With electricity, and I will go through this, it's to expand the offshore wind power in near time. With the transportation, I will show you 7 different measures that we have, but in short, it's road taxes, and it's a major investment to improve public transport. And then with the forestry, it's so important, and I know a lot of you here in the audience are already aware of that. But we need to protect more forests. We need to make a transition to close to nature forestry and reduce the felling. And we will go through this. So the results is that this can be done as we see it. But even if we reach net zero, close to net zero by 2040, the emissions budget is exceeded. The emission budget, I said, it was assumed to be 222 megaton. But even if we reduce the emission with the quite hard decisions that we present, it's exceeded by 128 megaton, so nearly by 50%. And this must be compensated in other ways. And the forestry is one key component, but we also need other measures. So even if we reach net zero by 2040, we exceed the emissions budget. Okay, Fit for 55. I suppose you all know about that very much. And you know that it's divided into 3 bubbles, as they say: ETS, which is the industry, ESR, which is effort sharing regulation. That's what the governments have to do to cover up. And it's 60% of the fossil emissions that are covered by ESR. And ETS is 40%. And then you know that in the LULUCF, land use and land use change and forestry, there Sweden has been given the task to increase carbon dioxide uptake by 4 megaton until 2030. But since already now, in the last 5 years, our forests are taking up less carbon dioxide, the task is not only 4 megaton, but actually 19 megaton. And our suggestions will fix that if they are accepted. And if we wouldn't do what we should do within the LULUCF sector, we will have even harder restrictions in the ESR sector. We may be allocated even less allowances for the ESR. Okay, now next comes here the sector-wise decisions to take in crucial key areas. Energy and industry, which is closely related, transportation and forestry. So let's start with the energy. The electricity production must increase in near time. And you see here on the graphs that it will increase from below 200 terawatt hours to close to 280 by 2040. And as you see in the graphs here, it's mainly because of wind power. It's wind power and it's mainly offshore wind power. So it will increase from currently 50 terawatt hours to 130. And nuclear power, as the current government wants to favor, comes too late. We need the electricity already now. Then we often get questions about the biofuels. And according to the calculations that Lars Schütt has made here, they must stay at the current production of 154 terawatt hours. So as you see in this graph here, we have pairs of staples. They show 2022 to the left and 2035 to the right. You see that only biogas will increase because biogas is a good biofuel. It takes care of the methane that otherwise would be released anyway. And here is a graph that I got from Lars yesterday. It shows the decline in the emissions from the industry with the suggestions that we have in the transition plan compared to the black line, which is wait and see. And that differs by 60 megaton. Then we come to the transportation, which is maybe the most difficult sector because the companies, they are already thinking that what do I do business with in 25 years' time? So they are all transitioning, more or less, many companies at least. But the transportation, we are driving too much with our cars. And we have these 7 measures that can be quickly introduced. I will just shortly go through them. The first one is the road charges that will be introduced for passengers' cars and light and heavy goods vehicles. They are dynamic and differentiated, so they must not be the same in the countryside as in the cities. And they will be related to how much you drive and how heavy the car is and so on and so forth. The second point is that those charges that will be an income together with the carbon taxes and what we get from the ETS2. And that should be used to finance the public transportation. Then number 3 is very easy because we had a mode-neutral travel deduction, reseavdrag, and it's just to reintroduce that again. this government took it away. So you only get reseavdrag if you travel with your own car, but not if you buy a bus ticket or a train ticket. That is not good. And then number 4 is a national ticket system for public transportations. Number 5 is a ban on new sales of passengers cars from 2030, and you may know that EU wants to ban this from 2035. And then number 6 is the government commitments for expansion of charging infrastructure, laddinfrastrukturen. It's essential, and the government doesn't have to arrange it all, but they must take a responsibility to fix it. And then the number 7 is a railway package with investment in main lines and strong investment in railway maintenance. You all know that people want to go by train now, but it's very often fully booked, and it's full on the railways. So the graph shows how the emissions from transportation decrease until 2040 with these decisions. And we can reach almost net zero by 2040. But again, there is an overshoot when it comes to the emissions budget. From this transportation that I show here, it exceeds by 67 megaton. And if we include bunkered fuels, by another 45 megaton. So therefore, we need more measures. And one measure is, again, to rebind carbon dioxide in forestry, which will be next topic here, but also to introduce more measures like environmental zones in the larger cities and increased petrol tax. This is to show how the calculations that are behind this report are not all available when you download the report, but people like Lars Schütt, who is here today, has all these major Excel sheets where they calculated that if we do this and if we do that, what will the effect be? So this example here shows that if we decrease traveling by passenger cars by 20%, that must be replaced in other ways by bicycling and walking, but also by trains and buses. And you see that the equation fits here. So what we decrease in personal cars is increased in other ways. So this is an example of all the calculations this group of 6 to 8 people have done as good as possible. Then we come to the forestry, and I know that this audience knows a lot about that also. It's about carbon dioxide uptake in near time. We can buy us time because the emission budget is, some estimations say that for Sweden it's finished by 2027. So we need to buy time to decrease the fossil fuel emissions, and the forest can help us with that. But it's also about increased biodiversity and increased resilience, because with the climate change that we see now, already now, the forests are more vulnerable to bark beetles and dryness and so on and so forth. Okay, so here are 4 bullet points now. Increased carbon dioxide uptake and biodiversity. We need increased protection of forests, at least 20% already within 5 years and at least 30% within 10 years. We need to do a major transition of the forestry. We need to ban clear cutting and land preparation. We need a new law, and only allow adapted clear cutting for this transition from clear cutting forestry to close to nature forestry. And the authorities must issue regulations for how this transition can be done. And then we need increased carbon dioxide storage in forests and soil by decreased felling. So we need to decrease the felling compared to today. And we need a new forestry law for increased carbon storage, including a set ceiling for felling. That must be introduced by law. And we need to adapt to the requirements we have from EU and by reduced felling. We can make possible ash return and liming, but fertilization should be banned because it disturbs the natural forest system. And then we have something that we will present here today, which is a financial compensation system for carbon dioxide storage to forest owners. And this is very much Lars Schütt, who is here today, that has come up with this suggestion and calculated on it. And then we need to restore forests by 2050, 90%, and recreate natural animal or plant populations and take away foreign tree species. Okay, here is the proposal for a carbon dioxide account for forest owners, and you should ask Lars about this. The background is that the value of the carbon bound in forests is very large, and the carbon dioxide released over time during felling represents actually a higher value than the net forest income for the forest owner. So therefore, it's of interest for the society that there is a system to benefit continued and increased carbon storage by reduced felling. So Lars has a suggestion for a system with a carbon dioxide account for every forest owner to generate a starting carbon store. And then the carbon stock store will increase when you don't harvest the wood. And then there is the suggestion that you can take out money from this account if you need to buy a new tractor or something without having to cut down the forest. And using an example where you pay 400 Swedish crowns per ton of carbon dioxide, the total cost will be, if you reduce logging to 80% of today, 6.4 billions, and if you reduce logging to 70% of the growth, close to 10 billions. And when I suggest this to politicians, they say that, well, 10 billions are not so much in a state budget. And this is just a table that Lars has made, and I will not go through it, but he really took an effort to see how this would work. And when we talk to the politicians now, we have invented a new expression. You know that we have klimatklivet and industriklivet, which is handled by the Naturvårdsverket and by Energimyndigheten. And we want to use this new expression, skogsklivet. And we hope to convince the Social Democrats about this, because they are soon having their Congress in Gothenburg in the end of May and the beginning of June. Skogsklivet. And here we have one more slide from concerning the forestry. You know that the uptake of carbon dioxide is considerable, 138 megaton per year, and we release fossil fuel a bit less than 50 megaton per year in Sweden. So the uptake is considerable, but the felling is also considerable. So there's a loss of 124 megatons per year. And this is distributed between some is left on the ground, some goes to timber, some goes to the paper mass industry. And take-home message is that only a very little part of what we harvest gets long-term carbon dioxide storage. So most of it is released within a few years. So with more close to nature forestry, we will produce more long-term carbon dioxide storage and timber and less of other things. These graphs show that the calculations show that if we reduce harvesting level by 17%, we will manage to increase the required carbon dioxide uptake by 19 megaton until 2030. And the other graph shows that how the storage in forests can be increased up to 2040, and we assume that much of this will be needed to compensate the fact that we couldn't reduce it fast enough in the other areas like transportation. Then we have a huge problem, and that is that the forest industry argues that increased logging provides climate benefits. And you all heard about the so-called substitution effect. And of course, there is a certain substitution effect. If you produce something after logging that will replace something that was based on fossil fuels, that's a substitution, but it's way overestimated. And when we talk to politicians, we say that they should read the report by Markku Rummukainen, who is here at Lund University. His synthesis report from 2024 has nearly 300 references and very quietly speaks about why we need to decrease the felling. But how to explain this to the public? It's very difficult. And how can one talk to the forest industry? Do you have ideas about that? It's related to the question, how can one talk to the fossil industry? Now I'm close to the end, but I must say something about a fair transition. And this graph is from Dagens Nyheter in 2023. It just illustrates that the richest 1% in Sweden must reduce their emissions by 93%. The richest 10%, which many of us belong to, must reduce it by 82%. But the ones with lowest income, they don't have to do very much about what they are doing because they are already now not releasing so much carbon dioxide. So therefore, we have listed also the suggestions from Oxfam here with a lot of taxation for permanent wealth and temporary tax on extraordinary wealth and so on and so forth. I think this must be handled on a global level, but taxation is not easy on a global level. But it's the rich people that emit carbon dioxide. Soon it is time for COP30 and the NDCs are insufficient. If you look at Climate Action Tracker, you see that no countries are green here that is compatible with the 1.5 degrees Paris Agreement. There are very few that are almost sufficient. You see there are 3 countries in Africa that are almost sufficient. And most are either insufficient, highly insufficient, or critically insufficient. What to do about this? Well, one reason for why we wanted to present this to you today is that I have the idea that maybe national climate transition plans like this one, made by a very small NGO, could be used to improve the NDCs that the countries hand in. I don't know if it's possible or not, but the minimum requirement of the NDCs should be that the probability to acquire a certain temperature limit is stated. And it should also be stated how emission budget fulfills the Paris Agreement and especially the Article 2.2. And then there should be commitments for political decisions and calculations of what emission reduction they give. That's why I think this document is such an important starting point. Then this is the last slide. Thanks for listening, and we are ready to take questions. And if you want to support Klimatriksdagen, you can become a member. Okay, I stop here.